The restaurant lights were too bright, the tablecloth too white, and the silence between them was the loudest sound Mira Ellison had heard in months. Until the man across from her finally set down his napkin, checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes, and told her, without even the courtesy of softening it, that she simply wasn't what he was looking for. It was Christmas Eve. The city outside was dressed in lights and laughter, carolers on the corner, snow drifting past the window in lazy spirals, and inside that small overpriced bistro, a 34-year-old woman sat alone with a half-eaten plate of pasta going cold in front of her, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She had believed, foolishly perhaps, that this blind date, arranged by a well-meaning coworker, might be the beginning of something. Instead, it had become one more entry in a long list of quiet humiliations. One more reminder that at her age, with her history, with the weight of loneliness she carried like a second skin, she was somehow always the one left behind. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that sometimes the universe has a plan hidden behind its cruelest moments, do me a favor before we go any further into Mira's story. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me you're watching, share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's go back to that Christmas Eve, because what happened next would change Mira's life forever. Mira had not always been alone. 6 years earlier, she had been engaged to a man named Daniel, a kind-eyed architect who used to bring her coffee in bed and hum off-key in the shower. They had planned a wedding, picked out china patterns, even discussed names for children they hoped to have one day. Then, 3 months before the wedding, a drunk driver on a rain-slicked highway had taken him from her in the space of a single terrible night.
Mira had buried not just a fiancé but an entire imagined future, and in the years since, she had built walls so high around her heart that even she sometimes forgot what it felt like to hope for something without immediately bracing for the loss of it. She worked as a pediatric nurse at St.
Agnes Hospital, a job she had chosen if she was honest with herself because it let her pour all the love she had nowhere else to put into children who were not her own. She was good at her job, gentle with frightened toddlers, patient with exhausted parents, the kind of nurse who remembered birthdays and snuck in extra pudding cups when no one was looking. But when her shifts ended and she drove home to her small, quiet apartment, the silence would settle over her like a weight, and she would wonder, not for the first time, if she was destined to spend every Christmas Eve exactly like this one, alone, rejected, and increasingly convinced that whatever love she had left in her was simply too much for anyone to want. The date that night had been her friend Carla's idea. Carla worked in the hospital's administration office and had been trying for over a year to set Mira up with someone, anyone, insisting that Mira was too wonderful to spend her life single. The man Carla had chosen this time was named Grant, a divorced insurance adjuster with a firm handshake and an even firmer opinion of himself. From the moment they sat down, Mira could feel the mismatch between them, the way his eyes kept drifting to his phone, the way he talked more about his golf handicap than he asked about her life. Still, she had tried. She had smiled, asked questions, laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, because after so many years of loneliness, she had learned to hold on to even the faintest possibility of connection. But Grant, it turned out, had already made up his mind before the appetizers arrived. When he finally spoke the words that ended the evening, telling her flatly that she wasn't quite what he had pictured, that she seemed a bit too soft, too eager, too much like someone still grieving instead of someone ready to move forward, Mira felt something inside her crack quietly, the way ice cracks beneath a foot before it fully gives way. She didn't cry, not there, not in front of him. She simply nodded, thanked him for his honesty in a voice that barely wavered, and watched him leave a few bills on the table before walking out into the snow without so much as a backward glance. She sat there a moment longer, staring at the flickering candle between them, feeling the particular loneliness that only comes from being rejected in a room full of happy strangers celebrating a holiday meant for love and family. Around her, other tables were filled with couples leaning close, with families passing dishes and children giggling over dessert, and Mira felt like a ghost haunting someone else's Christmas. She gathered her coat, left a generous tip out of habit rather than obligation, and stepped out into the cold night air, telling herself she would simply go home, change into pajamas, and let the evening dissolve into forgettable memory. It was on her walk back toward the parking garage, 3 blocks from the restaurant, that she first heard the crying. At first she thought it was the wind, or perhaps a stray cat somewhere in the alley. But as she rounded the corner near a shuttered flower shop, she saw her, a little girl, no older than 6, sitting alone on a cold concrete step beneath a broken street lamp, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, her small shoulders shaking as she sobbed into mittened hands. Mira's nursing instincts flared instantly beneath her own heartbreak, and she rushed forward, crouching down to the child's level, asking gently if she was hurt, if she was lost, if she knew where her parents were. The girl looked up at her with enormous brown eyes rimmed red from crying, her cheeks raw from the cold, and through hiccuping breaths she explained that her name was Lily, that she had been at the toy store with her father waiting for him to pay, that she had wandered outside for just a moment to look at the lights in the window across the street, and that when she turned around, she couldn't find him anymore. She had been searching for what felt like forever, she said, and now it was dark, and she was scared, and she just wanted to go home. Mira felt her own pain shrink instantly beside the raw terror in this child's voice. She wrapped her scarf around Lily's small shoulders, promised her they would find her father together, and pulled out her phone to call the police even as she gently guided the girl back toward the direction of the toy store, scanning every face on the sidewalk for someone searching just as desperately. They hadn't walked more than half a block when a man's voice erupted from somewhere ahead, raw with panic, calling Lily's name over and over into the crowded street. He came running toward them, a tall man in a wrinkled coat, his face pale with fear, and the moment Lily saw him, she broke free from Mira's side and ran into his arms, both of them collapsing into a tearful embrace of relief right there on the sidewalk while strangers paused to watch. The man whose name Mira would soon learn was Jack kept thanking her over and over, his voice cracking, explaining through tears that Lily was all he had left in the world, that his wife Lily's mother had passed away from cancer 8 months earlier, and that ever since, every crowded space, every moment out of his sight, filled him with a fear he could barely put into words. Mira assured him it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same, though something in her chest told her this was not nothing at all. There was a rawness in Jack's eyes that mirrored something she recognized in her own reflection most mornings. A grief that had carved itself so deeply into a person that it changed the shape of how they moved through the world. Before she could excuse herself and continue on her way home, Lily tugged at her father's sleeve and asked if the nice lady could come have hot chocolate with them, since it was Christmas Eve and nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve. Jackie, embarrassed but clearly grateful, apologized for his daughter's boldness, but something about the earnestness in Lily's small tear-streaked face, something about the exhaustion and loneliness Mira had been carrying all evening, made her say yes before she had even fully decided to. They ended up at a small 24-hour diner 2 blocks away, its windows fogged with warmth, a string of colored lights taped haphazardly along the counter, and there, over 3 mismatched mugs of hot chocolate, Mira found herself talking more freely than she had in years. She learned that Jack was a high school science teacher, that his wife Sarah had been a kindergarten teacher before her diagnosis, that the two of them had built a life full of small, quiet joys before cancer had stolen it away in less than a year. She learned that Lily had stopped talking for nearly 2 months after her mother's funeral, that grief counselors had worked patiently with her, that it was only in the last few weeks she had begun smiling again, asking questions again, becoming, in small, fragile pieces, a child again. And in turn, without quite meaning to, Mira found herself telling them about Daniel, about the wedding that never happened, about 6 years of nights spent convincing herself that love was simply not meant for her. Jack listened with a quiet intensity that Mira wasn't used to, none of the distracted phone checking or thinly veiled disinterest she had grown accustomed to on dates that inevitably went nowhere. When she finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes or rush to fill the silence. He simply said that grief has a way of making people believe they are unlovable, when really, they're just people who loved so deeply that the absence of it nearly broke them, and that the breaking, he thought, was proof of how much love they still had left to give. Something about the way he said it, gently, without pity, settled into Mira's chest like warmth spreading through cold hands. They talked for nearly 2 hours, long after the hot chocolate had gone lukewarm, while Lily colored quietly on paper placemats the waitress had given her, occasionally looking up to add her own opinions to the conversation with the blunt honesty only children possess. She declared that Mira's laugh sounded like Christmas bells, that she liked how Mira had knelt right down on the cold ground to help her instead of just calling out from far away, That Mira seemed like the kind of person who wouldn't forget you even after you walked away. When the diner finally announced it was closing for the night, the three of them stepped back out into the softly falling snow, and Jack, visibly nervous in a way that felt endearing rather than off-putting, asked if perhaps he could take down Mira's number, if she wouldn't mind, so that Lily could properly thank her again once she'd calmed down, and so that he might have the chance to thank her too, over dinner sometime, if she was willing. Meter, who only hours earlier had been told she wasn't what someone was looking for, felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes as she agreed. Before they parted ways that night, Lily ran back and wrapped her small arms around Mira's legs in an unplanned fierce hug, and looking up with those same wide brown eyes, still glistening from earlier tears but now bright with something like hope, she asked the question that would echo in Mira's mind for the rest of her life. Could Mira be her new mom, since her old mom was in heaven now? And Christmas wishes were supposed to come true, weren't they? Jack immediately began apologizing, flustered, explaining that Lily didn't fully understand social boundaries yet, that he hoped Mira wasn't uncomfortable. But Mira simply knelt down once more to Lily's level, took the little girl's cold hands in her own, and told her gently that things like that couldn't happen overnight, that mothers and daughters needed time to grow close and trust one another, but that she would very much like to be her friend, starting tonight, and see where that friendship might lead them both. Lily seemed satisfied with this answer in the uncomplicated way that children accept truth, nodding solemnly before breaking into a gap-toothed smile and waving as her father led her toward their car. Mira walked to her own car that night in a daze, replaying the entire evening in her mind, the rejection that had wounded her so deeply just hours earlier now feeling like a distant, almost necessary chapter that had to happen in order to place her on that particular sidewalk at that particular moment. She drove home through streets glowing with holiday lights, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not feel the crushing weight of Christmas Eve loneliness. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar and fragile, something that felt dangerously close to hope. In the weeks that followed, Jack did call, and their dinner became a second dinner, and then a slow, unhurried courtship built not on grand gestures but on quiet Sunday mornings, on Lily's endless questions, on the careful, patient work of two grieving hearts learning to trust again. Mira never rushed the process, mindful always that Lily needed a friend before she needed a mother figure, and mindful too of her own healing, of the walls that had taken years to build and would take time gently to lower. But little by little, dinner by dinner, bedtime story by bedtime story, something beautiful began to take shape between the three of them. Something none of them had expected to find on a Christmas Eve that had begun in heartbreak. If this story has touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that rejection is sometimes just redirection, that the universe often has better plans waiting just around the corner, please take a moment right now to like this video and share it with someone who might need this message today. Your support means more than you know, and it helps stories like Mira's reach the people who need them most. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something, and I'd love for you to answer honestly in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment where rejection led you towards something far more beautiful than you originally hoped for? Share your story with us, because somewhere out there, someone reading the comments tonight might need to hear exactly what you have to say. A year later, on another Christmas Eve, Mira stood in Jack's kitchen, now increasingly her kitchen too, wearing an apron dusted with flour as she and Lily decorated sugar cookies together, laughter filling a home that had once known only silence and grief. Lily, 7 years old now and endlessly chatty, still occasionally called her Mira, but more and more often in quiet, unguarded moments. The word that slipped out instead was Mom, spoken not as a question this time, but as a simple, settled truth. Jack watched them from the doorway with an expression Mira had come to know well, one of quiet, overwhelming gratitude. And later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching a stuffed reindeer beneath the tree, he got down on one knee in the soft glow of Christmas lights and asked Mira to be his wife, to be Lily's mother not just in name but forever. And through happy tears, she said yes. Sometimes the very worst moments of our lives are simply the universe clearing space for something far greater to arrive, and sometimes the family we're meant to have finds us in the most unexpected way, on the coldest sidewalk, during the loneliest night, through the innocent, hopeful question of a little girl who simply refused to stop believing in Christmas wishes.